All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Guess this will be the last video presentation of the year. The 345 class, they've already taken the final. Results look pretty good. I think the median was in the mid to upper 70s, which is pretty good for a final exam. There were 47 multiple choice questions on the exam. Or was it 48? There might have been 48. There were a couple more than I was expecting. I knew we were going to take off a few topics that we didn't get covered this semester due to moving the course to more of a distance learning course. So I thought that the coordinator was just going to drop about 5 questions. I think she dropped 5, but then added a few more back in. It didn't seem like the students this morning had any trouble getting through the test in the 2 hours. I think she suggested bumping it up to 2.5 hours. I'm not sure why. She said something about loading graphs, but boy, I thought it loaded just fine. Anyway, so I'll give you guys 2.5 hours as well, although I don't think you'll need it. It opens up at 12:45 for you. And based on the performance recently, I would be surprised if the median score was any lower than it was for my other class. With that said, this hour is, or hour and a half, or whatever you want to make of it. This is your time to ask me whatever you want. So type in the questions in the chat. If there's questions in general you want me to talk about, I'd be happy to do that. If there's specific problems that you want me to look at, I will do those as well. I did notice the other day when I was writing on here, sometimes it was clear and sometimes it wasn't clear. And I think maybe if I step back a little bit and sort of stay on the same distance from the gosh, every time I watch here, it looks just fine. I go back and watch them a little later and things get fuzzy sometimes. Yeah, there it goes. Huh. Oh, well. I suppose next time if I did be in this situation again, I'd probably invest in a more sophisticated camera, maybe a real video camera instead of a webcam, something where I can set the focus and just have it stay right on the board. Certainly don't need to be focused on me, but the writing sometimes was pretty messy. I noticed it would sort of come in and out. I guess you watched it. So throw up any questions you have. While I'm waiting for some questions, I'm going to run downstairs, get my cup of coffee. I'll be right back up. questions yet. I should tell you a little story about this exam. I kept waiting for the coordinator to put it on Blackboard. I was waiting and waiting, and it got to be last night about, I don't know, when did we finish yesterday? Finished, and and then I went to edit the video to put in the timestamps, and I contacted the coordinator and asked her when she was going to be done with the final. And she said, well, she's not done with it yet. And she asked when my final was, and I told her weeks ago it was on Friday. She had interpreted it as being next Friday. She forgot that we switched the final exam schedule this semester. They started yesterday, run through Thursday. There are no finals next Friday. So I think she was in a bit of a panic. I kept contacting her off and on through the evening. I think 10:30 I just gave up, and I hoped and prayed that she had it ready for the 7:45 class this morning. I got up at 7, and sure enough, it was loaded on Blackboard. I looked at the timestamp on her email. I think it was like 4:27. She said that it was ready for me to go take a look at. So I did. I took a look at it. I only found one typo out of 48 questions, which to me was pretty remarkable, considering she probably did the whole darn thing from 4 in the afternoon until 4 in the morning. And there's enough graphics and things on there that it couldn't have been an easy task. So anyway, I took it this morning and at 7 o'clock or so. I think it took me 20 minutes maybe to work through all 48 problems. And she had the right answer for each of them, so that's always good. I always like to preview the multiple choice finals, because sometimes you know how it is. You type of something wrong and you forget a zero someplace, or you neglect the decimal, and then the answer that you think you typed in isn't there. But I was happy to see that every question had an answer that was present in one of the 5 spots. So maybe one question I should mention that was a little different, that we hadn't really talked about a lot. So we didn't really use the word acceleration as much. Let's say we're tossing a ball up into the air, and the distance above, let's go with height. The height above the ground, h of t, maybe it's 48 plus 60 t minus 16t squared. T is measured in seconds, and h of t is measured in feet. So this would be the height above the ground. If I ask you what the first derivative of h prime of t, that's the speed at any time. That's how quickly the height changes. H prime of t in this case would have been the derivative 60 minus 32t. So the speed after 0 seconds was 60. I tossed it up. Speed after 1 second, it's slowing down, was 28. Speed after 2 seconds would have been -4, would have been coming back to the ground. They asked a question about, or she asked a question about, what's the acceleration, and that measures how the speed is changing. So the acceleration will be the second derivative. In this case, it's -32, and the units here are feet per second per second. We did some work like that. I'm not sure how often we use the word acceleration, however. Hope I can spell. I don't know if that's spelled right or wrong. Looks like it needs two L's, but that doesn't look right anyway. Oh well. So there was a question that dealt with the acceleration of a body given a distance formula, but that was not something that I focused on a lot in class. But there was a question like that on the final exam, and that surprised me a little bit because we'd never had that question on a final before using the words acceleration. So that's, I guess, the one thing maybe to look out for. One thing I took away from being able to look at that exam. My hopes, of course, were that she'd have the exam up and ready to go, and I could offer you some advice. I would have looked at it a day or two in advance, and that didn't happen. But then again, looking at that review sheet, everything else that we did on the review sheet, it had its, well, not, I shouldn't say that. Every other question on the final exam had its precursor somewhere on the review sheet. So if you can understand everything that was on the review sheet, this exam should go just fine. So I went to bed a little after midnight last night, just hoping that I could preview the final exam. I couldn't. Caused me a fitful night of sleep because I was unsure when she was going to put this online. I desperately wanted to preview it before I turned it loose. I woke up at 5. Finally, it was there. So I got a really a short, fitful night of sleep, just worrying about whether that thing would be ready for my 7:45 final this morning. It's thankful that it was. I do have some of my staff doing some grading today. I know that I have a small amount of homeworks and quizzes for your class as well that I have to take a look at. And I'll get to that probably, I don't know, today's going to be a busy day. Probably tomorrow sometime. At that point, should be able to wrap everything up. If you have a homework that you've not yet turned in, make sure you turn it in. That, I think the last activity was technically due yesterday, but if you get it turned in today, that's not a problem. If you've missed a quiz because you were at work or something like that, let me know. I can open a quiz back up. Same thing with the MyLab Math. Most of you were right on top of that, but every once in a while there's a student who had something come up. Mostly you're really good about communicating with me, letting me know that this is happening, and I would certainly be able to grant extensions. I think the grades are due, if I'm not mistaken, they're due next Friday. It could be the following Tuesday. There's a nice little week here where we'll be able to sort out all the grades and make sure everything that's needed that you plan on submitting is submitting, and we can sort of work from there. So I'm still awaiting my first question. Anything at all, let me know what you have for me. I'm sort of tired of monologuing at this point. 14 minutes of monologue is a little much for me. I would like to commend, especially this class, I thought students in my 215 class really paid good attention even after we were moved to a distance. I had a couple students say they actually preferred doing it this way because these live help sessions were more valuable and easier to view than it would have been to attend my office hours, which I don't know. I took sort of good and sort of bad. I was happy that you saw some value in this. I always like it when students come to my office hours, and I certainly missed some of the interactions. I know I had a small group of 5 or 6 pretty dedicated students that would come in once or twice a week, and I was really thrilled to see how much better those students were doing after the first or after the second exam. Once they finally figured out all the little nuances of how this course went. It happens every semester, and it happened this semester. But I was really pleased with the feedback I got here on the chat. There were several students who were working problems through with me, and a lot of my regular students that I'd see for just a question or two, they would pop up with a question or two. So that made the learning experience, I think, a little better really for everyone, because the rest of you can see what I did with those small groups. The one thing I'm not sure if I've done yet is, I know at the end of the semester there's something I'm supposed to do to get the course evaluations going. I open up my email every morning and still there's 30 emails in it pretty much every morning. So many are coming from the administration. There's so many things that I've read and not bookmarked or forgotten. For example, I didn't know that the math department's policy was not to proctor exams. I just didn't want to go through the hassle of setting up Proctorio. Yeah, I assumed that this one was going to be proctored, but I found out like 2 days ago that the math department decided not to proctor any exams, and that was a departmental policy. I had no idea till I was informed by the coordinator last night that none of this is going to be proctored. Still awaiting my first question. What do you have for me today? $3D it is. All right. And we're finally underway. Okay, so on all of the, sure I got my right marker here. Yeah, there we go. On all of the limits, when you're sending a limit as x or h approaches a number, your first step on that is to plug the number in. And one of three things is going to happen. If you plug the number in and you get some number back, maybe you get 3/8, or maybe you get 16, or maybe you get e, that's the limit. Those are the cases where the function is continuous. That's simple. You might get a number over 0, in which you better look from the right or the left and see whether they're going to infinity or negative infinity. And then the last case is you get some number like 0/0. So if you plug in the limit number and you get 0/0, that means you must factor and cancel. And that's what we have to do on problem 3D. We have the limit as h approaches 0, negative 2xh plus 3h minus 5h squared, all divided by h. Now this is a typical result you would get if you're trying to find the derivative using the four-step method and you start with a polynomial. So you get this far, there's the 3 steps, the f of x plus h minus f of x over h. Now if you plug in h equals 0, that's 0, that's 0, that's 0, that's 0, you get 0/0. Here's where you factor the h out. And you have a couple of ways you could go about that. You could physically do it, limit as h goes to 0 of. You can factor an h out of the numerator, negative 2x plus 3 minus 5h over h, and then cancel the h's. A method that I mentioned early in the class when we're still in the algebra review. If you have a common factor in every term, you can just knock that out. So either way you do it, you're left with a minus 2x plus 3 minus 5h. Now when I plug in the value h equals 0, I don't have any problem. I just have a number left. and the number that's left is the variable number minus 2x plus 3. So every time there's a 0 over 0, you should be able to do some factoring. You should be able to figure out what that limiting factor is and then cancel that out. So looking back at a previous problem, I'll show you one other aspect that's going to be handy. How about problem 3a? 3x minus 2, 5x squared minus 18x minus 8. The limit here as x, whoops, it's 12, as x approaches 4. So the first thing we do is plug in x equal 4. If we do in the numerator, we get 12 minus 12. In the denominator, we get 80 minus 72 minus 8. We get 0 over 0. So since this is a 0 over 0 answer, that means we have to be able to factor and cancel. And the beautiful thing about these is you know what the factor is. The factor that's common to both of those, the thing that gives you a 0 in the numerator and in the denominator, must be an x minus 4. That's the only polynomial that'll produce a 0. Made that a factor of that. So you know this must be there and that must be there. If this was a 6, it would have been x minus 6 and x minus 6. If this was x approaches minus 3 that gave you a 0 over 0, then it would be an x plus 3, x plus 3. So if you can see the value that gives you the 0, x minus that value must be a factor. Well, factoring the numerator, I can tell the other factor is just a 3 distributed through. There it is. And this other one there, I can sort of piece together. I need to multiply those two numbers together to get a 5x squared, so that must be a 5x. The numbers at the end have to multiply together to give a negative 8. That must be a plus 2. You can FOIL this out if you'd like to, and you will see there's a minus 20x plus 2x. Sure enough, that negative 18x folds right out. Now we can cancel that offending factor, plug in the number 4, and we get 3 over 22. There's our limit for that one. So there's such a nice advantage of these limits when they go to 0 over 0. You ought, as long as we have a polynomial, as long as we have a rational function where it's a polynomial over a polynomial, we know that factor. We know one of the factors that makes that up, and it makes the problem so much easier. Factoring is a breeze if you know what the offending factor is. So that was a long drawn about way to get through problem 3, I guess 3D. Around 3D we had an h. H minus 0, I guess, would be a counterpoint to how this previous one was done. I'll have to say I'm sort of glad I'm not getting a lot of the really difficult word problems. When I don't sleep well, as I did last night, sometimes it's so hard to concentrate. And I took the test this morning. My brain was all foggy. So one more time. Send me a chat. Any questions in general? Any procedural questions? Any specific questions on the review packet? 43 it is, sure. I think that was the very last one, was it not? I think that's probably the one I didn't do yesterday. Yeah, so it was on the previous activity. So let's see if we can find the equilibrium price. So we have the demand curve, downward sloping, supply curve, upward sloping. Right here we have what's known as either X hat or X bar. I think on the final that was an X hat. That's a P hat. This is the quantity demanded at the equilibrium point and the price at the equilibrium point. Shade the area for consumer surplus in red. Oh, I don't think I have a red marker. Anyway, this up here is a consumer surplus. That down here is a producer surplus. I'll crosshatch that the other direction. So that should be red. And this should be blue. Find the equilibrium quantity and price. Okay. We'll find that equilibrium point. We'll find the two places, the one place where those two equations are equal to each other. So we have 50 e to the 0.02x equals 1,000 e to the negative 0.012x. There's the equation to solve. Notice all the x's are in the exponential. And since this is a negative exponent, I could just as easily see this as having an e to the 0.012x positive in the denominator. One of the negative exponents are really handy when you're finding derivatives, but thinking algebra-wise, it's not the handiest thing in the world. When I see an equation like this, it makes a lot more sense as to what I'm going to do to solve it than if I have the negative exponent. So what I'm going to do here is multiply through both sides by the denominator, e to the 0.012x. And what that does is allows me to get rid of the fractions. Now here I have e to a power times e to a power, and when you have, say, x to the a times x to the b, what you do is add those exponents. So we have exponents to two different powers here. We are going to add those exponents. This is 50 e to the 0.0, whoops, add them correctly here, 32x. That's equal to 1,000. Classic here at this point. So someone with a calculator is going to have to help me out. I don't have a natural log button that I can summon on my browser. We're going to get there fairly soon. Divide both sides by 50. E to the 0.032x is equal to 20. And now I'm going to need to bring logarithms in. Remember, logarithm asks what the power is. I want to know what's this power that gives me e to a value is 20. And the answer to that is the natural log 20. That's this power. The natural log 20 is 0.032x. Let's divide both sides by 0.032. And then we find the x value. And I remember this one from the other day. I'm going to check. Oh, I have the answer key right here. No, I don't, but I do have the question key right here, and that's what I was looking for. I remember this from last time. This came out to be about 94. So we know the quantity demanded now is 94. That allows us to start to set up our definite integrals that we would need in order to find the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. Now, in order to find this value, We know the X value. Let's plug that X value into either the supply or the demand. I'd plug it into both. So I have 50 e to the 0.02 times 94. I try that one, and then I plug it in the other one just to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. 1000 e to the negative 0.012 times 94. And if these numbers are radically different, then I know I screwed up the equilibrium point. Both values should give me, there's some rounding here, but they should give me just about the same. So I'm going to type that in here and see what I can do. Let's see, 50 e, whoops, e to the parentheses 0.02 times 94. Looks like that's about a 328 when I type it in the top one. I'm going to try it in the bottom. Let's round it to the nearest whole. And I'm going to try it in the bottom one. So there we have 1000 e to the negative 0.012, negative 0.0 times 94, and that one came out to be 324. Yeah, pretty close. So I'm going to just guess this is 326, sort of split the difference between the two. Had I kept this rounded, had I not rounded so quickly, those two would have moved together a little closer. So that's good enough. And the answers on the answer key that I looked at this morning, I mean, their rounding errors are not going to throw you off. The right answer is thousands of points apart from the wrong answer. So now let's go back and see if we can find this consumer surplus. Consumer surplus, that's the area under this curve and above that curve. So I'm going to go upper curve minus lower curve. Here's my antiderivative from 0 to 94. Let's see, that was that's the demand curve. That's negative sloping. So this will be 1000 e to the negative 0.012x minus 326 dx. Okay, doing the calculations on this one, I'm going to have 1000 divided by, type that in there. 1000 divided by negative 0.012. So this is negative 83,333 e to the negative 0.012x minus 326x. There's the function. Okay. And how did I get this number? Well, remember taking the antiderivative of e to a function of x, you keep the 1000, you keep the e, you do not change that power no matter what. And then you multiply by the reciprocal of the derivative, so that'd be negative 1 over 0.012. That multiplication gives me the coefficient there. Evaluate that from 94 to 0. I'm not sure what it is when you throw in 94. I'll leave that up to you. I can calculate this when I plug in the 0. Plug in the 0 here gives me a negative 83,333 minus 0. So that part I'm sure of. You'll have to do this on your own. This comes out negative, I'm sure, as well. It's not as negative as this number. And of course, an area between curves, if you do upper function minus lower function, this must come out positive. So I'm going to leave that part up to you. You plug in the 94 there, 94 there, calculate out what you get. I'm going to cease at this point and go back and pick up the producer surplus. Now, the producer surplus has the same limits. We're still going from 0 to 94. So when I go to calculate the producer surplus, I set up my definite integral. I go from my upper value to my lower value, so that would be 326. That y value is bigger than my supply curve. Subtract off from that 50e to the 0.02x dx. Again, it's the definite integral. It's the area between those curves. Okay. Yeah, 93.6, right? I just used 94 because it was handy and close enough for this sort of work. So now let's see if we can come up with the antiderivative here. Well, this is 326x, no doubt, minus, I have the same problem here I had before. It'll be 50 divided by 0.02, that's 2500, e to the 0.02x. I'm going to evaluate that from 94 to 0. Where does 2500 come from? Well, it's 50 multiplied by 1 over 0.02 if you want to check my work on that. Yeah, that looks good. So now we're going to plug in 94. I'm not sure what you get when you plug in 94. I am sure what you get when you plug in 0. When you plug in 0, this is 0, and this is negative 2500. So calculate whatever that number is, do the subtraction, and you have worked your way then through through the consumer surplus and producer surplus. I've noticed there's a couple of these on the exam today. One of them has you find the equilibrium point. One of them, I think, tells you, doesn't mess around with trying to find this. It already tells you what this is. So you'll have to find the equilibrium price and then set up the antiderivative. There are like 3 or 4 consumer, 2 or 3, I'll restate that, 2 or 3 producer consumer surplus questions. None of them had you start with both equations and work all the way through a problem. They were sort of broken up into bits. One problem, I believe, was find the equilibrium point. One problem was, given this and given a supply curve, can you come up with what the either consumer or producer surplus was? I think one of them might have just been set up a definite integral. Do you happen to get my email? I'm not sure. When did you set it? I'm a little bit behind on grading, so if it's has anything to do with grading from activities 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, they're still in my inbox. I get as much grading done as I can, but I'm certainly limited to what I can get done. So I'm hoping that if it's that related, I'll get to it probably tomorrow. If there's anything else, I'll check my inbox as soon as we're done here, and I can get back to you then. And I don't have my email loaded here on my computer right now. I'm one of those people who cannot put it on my phone because I'd be looking at my phone all the time. So I just separate that little corner of my life off. I know most of you probably are on at a moment's notice, but those of us who value our privacy, I guess, a little more, I tend to, when I'm done with work, I want to be done with work. I'll log in the morning and check it again. I'll have to say I probably check more since we moved away to the distance learning. I probably check it more times a day now than what I used to. I used to get up in the morning, triage, go through everything that needed to be done. Maybe at noon, look at it. Then we have classes all day. maybe just a little bit at the end of class. Now I look at it at least 5 times a day, I would say. So if I didn't get back to you about something, if it's grading, it's just because I haven't had a chance to get through all the grading yet. I know there's a couple that didn't get sent to me, or it didn't get included on the submission page, and they end up in my email inbox. And I'll work my way down through them. Anyone have any more questions? I can still hang out 20 minutes if you'd like. Well, based on what I saw this morning, it didn't look like anyone was having any trouble finishing the exam. The coordinator, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again. The coordinator thought we should give everyone an extra 15 minutes in case it takes a long time to load some of the questions because there's some graphs involved. I didn't find it took any time at all. My internet is pretty good. It's not the greatest, but the thing loaded in 2 seconds. So I don't know. Anyway, she suggested we open it for an hour and a half, so it's open for an hour and a half. Or I'm sorry, 2.5 hours. And when I looked before I came up here, I think there was still a half hour left. People had worked through 2 hours, and almost the folks who took it at 7:45. After 2 hours of work, I think there were maybe 5 people left still working on it. Everyone else had long ago finished. Any other questions? So again, this will be graded automatically. I'll probably spend a good deal of time tomorrow once my eyes have recovered, trying to get through all the grading and get everything buttoned up. If there's, after tomorrow, if there's still some things that you see that have not been graded, or there's a quiz that you missed for a reason, let me know. I can open a quiz back up. If there's a MyLab that you missed, I can open the MyLab back up, as long as it's one of the more recent ones. Might as well get all the points in that we can. 14,260.2. Okay, I like it. Anything else? All right, as I typically am, I'll be looking at my email fairly often in the next couple of hours, hour and a half. So if you do have some questions, let me know. All right. Hope the exam goes well for you, and I wish you all best of luck moving forward.